Oh man, I was just watching, some random YouTuber video popped up saying, like, what's the point of living? Why are we here? Type video. And it's done by True Media 777. And, he was ranting about a lot of stuff. But then his last thing was, what's the point of going to work for 35 years, only for you to retire and only be able to live and do what you want for like a few years? Why work your whole life, only be able to do what you want for a few years? And retire or whatever, do what you want for a few years at the end. And that got me thinking. I was like, man, millennials and Gen Z can't retire? So that's out of the window. That's out of the window immediately. Millennials and Gen Z ain't gonna be able to retire. Man, there's a few that might be able to do that. And you gotta remember, yeah, you put up your 401k. You work at a company, 30 something years. You don't touch that 401k, it should grow. It should grow. But you got to be at that company for so long. And they got to pay you well. Millennials and Gen Z barely are going to get on with a company that long. Look at all of these places like Facebook, especially like in that tech sector. If you just a random worker working at Amazon warehouse, are you working for, tech support and stuff like that for some of these companies? You might work there 10 years and then boom, they doing layoffs, they closing down business and all of that. A lot of people might have been at a company 10 years, COVID hit, boom, they done. Look at all these people that worked at Payless for a long time, boom, they closed their doors. And you had some other like companies in the clothing close their doors. A lot of tech places close their doors. You look at all these video game companies laying off thousands of people. Even factory workers like, I think like Tyson Chicken, they make chicken, bro. And they laid off a bunch of people. The airports, all of these people getting laid off. I don't even know any Gen Z, well, maybe not Gen Z, any Gen Z or millennial that actually been with the company longer than 10 years. It might be like one or two. And hell, you gone are the days of like, oh, somebody worked at Lowe's or Home Depot, started from the bottom, now they like a little manager or something. Nah, that's done. Man, Gen Z millennials not gonna be able to retire. Now, if Gen Alpha and Gen Beta learn from the mistakes of Gen Z and the millennials, I think the millennials and Gen Z will tell Gen Alpha and Gen Beta the truth about how things work. Gen Alpha and Gen Beta may have a chance. Gen Z and Millennials and Gen Z, they pretty much done. They're gonna have to be the ones to struggle up until old age, while Gen Alpha and Gen Beta become the middle class. Like, it's going to have to happen that way. Millennials and Gen Z may actually come together. You know, you got a lot of the Gen Z that were very, very, very left-leaning, and they see that's not working, and so it's kind of split up half and half. Now, millennials are kind of more forgiving, if I would say, but I think with the politics thing, if anybody has to revolt, it's probably going to start with the millennials, and Gen Z is going to follow behind. You know, it's getting to that point of almost civil war, because millennials and Gen Z won't be able to retire. They won't have Social Security. Like, that lies over with. You know, and every time the millennials and Gen Z try to do a little something like drop shipping, you know, Amazon, FBA, you know, they try to do something just to make it. You know, they're not really looking for millions of dollars instantly. They're not really looking for that. They just want to make, you know, 500, you know, to 600, maybe even $200, $300 extra a month. You know, if they could work at, hell, Walmart, but have a little side hustle making them some money, they honestly wouldn't really care, because they could do it with that money. You know, they could invest it, do what they want. But the government shuts them down. Just look at with the taxes. You might have had people cutting hair, doing something, and then they said, oh, if you make more than $600 on Cash App and stuff, you got to pay taxes on it. You know, if you sell a sofa for $600, you got to, over $600, you got to pay taxes on it and stuff. So any little thing, man, the government is raining down on people just trying to climb from up under debt. And you got, you know, some of those people who not quite retired yet, they getting hit hard. You know, I know some people that's making over $100,000 a year, you know, complaining about grocery prices and stuff. Because you got to think about it. They make $100,000 a year, take taxes out of that. With the rising food prices and stuff and grocery, you got to think about it, they getting taxed way harder because they make more. So by the time they get their check, it ain't really nothing. Like, you think, oh, I'm making $100,000 a year. In the USA, that's not a lot, because trust me, that person probably has, especially if they got a family with some kids, you know, they got to have a reliable car and all that. You know, if you making $100,000, you're not driving a car from 1998 for the rest of your life. You know, you have to live at some point. You know, you could afford it, but you know, you need something reliable. You need to buy something that's gonna have a warranty on it. You know, so to get a warranty, you have to get a newer car, and you might even want to put an extended warranty on it, because man, if something goes wrong, these people gonna want $1 billion to fix your car. And the way credit is set up, man, the end of Gen Z, like the tail end of the Gen Zs, they said to hell with that, you know, retirement stuff. We gonna live life now. They didn't ran up their credit cards. They didn't messed up their credit so bad, taking these trips, going to Disney World, going to different countries, buying all these plane tickets. And they said, hey, when we actually get a job and stuff, like it don't matter because they ruined it so early, they could recover from it. Which is kind of smart because that debt, I believe, or if they file for bankruptcy or something, I forgot, like it goes off your credit report in 7 years. So basically, if they, fresh out of college or fresh out of high school, their credit score is good. They ruin their credit. I mean, get all the lines of credit. Man, by 30, all that'll be erased. All that debt and stuff will be erased, and they might could actually build it back up. If they start building their credit back up from 26 to 30, you making some payments, building it up, your score will probably go up. I know I was pissed because I made like 5 years of on-time payments, and my score would not rise. And then I forgot to actually pay one bill one time, and it dropped my points by like 14 points. And I was like, how in the hell could I have 99% for 5 years on-time payments, and y'all don't even up my score by like 3 points? That's the type of stuff the millennials and Gen Z dealing with. All of that stuff is fake. And then you have all of these illegals come here and getting all of the handouts. They getting all of the food stamps. They getting all kind of help with housing and all of this stuff. Man, like, I'm telling you, millennials and Gen Z not going to be able to retire unless they come up with something that's going to give them a lot of money over time, and they just have it saved in their bank account. You're not going to be able to invest. They can't invest their way into retirement because they won't hold a job for over, 20, 30 years because they can't get it. They can't get that job. And if they do get a job where they could stay for 30 years, they're going to have to, they won't be able to survive, honestly. I can't just say cut back and do all that. Like, if you want to work at Walmart for 30 years, you cannot survive. You can't get a car. You can't, pay rent. Like, you will not make it. So, I don't know what to tell that dude, man. Like, Gen Z, millennials won't be able to retire. And it's just so happened, if they happen to be a doctor, lawyer, do something like that. If they happen to get in a profession like that, kudos to them. But that's only like a tiny fraction of people that's going to do that. And about 30 to 40% of them will be H-1B visas that came here to be that. You're going to get your Indians, Asians, all the foreigners are going to be all the doctors and stuff. They just cut nursing, loans back. And a lot of nurses are black women, believe it or not. So now you're going to have less black women go become nurses, and then maybe say, hey, what, I might want to be a doctor. So that's going to be cut down a lot. So y'all just, put down in the comments what y'all think the next 10 to 20 years going to look like for America. Man, you know what? 5, 10, 15. Put that in the comments of what y'all think America is going to be. Will Gen Z and millennials be able to retire in the future? Let me know. Okay, I wasn't sure if I'm going to add this clip to the beginning or the ending of that retirement millennial Gen Z video, but this is just another clip that's really good, proving my point that, hey, Gen Z and millennials, they not going to be able to retire.
The distance between the richest person and the poorest person had shrunk. There was enormous wealth in the United States. There was a 25-year span of time post-World War II. Piketty wrote Capital in the 21st Century, that book. In it, he says it's the only time in human history where you could get a job and work your way to wealth. All the other times in human history, you need to either marry into wealth or be born into it or win the lottery. But the crazy thing is, Nixon comes in and his goal is to undo it. One of the things the U.S. figured out was if you have a rich public, that rich public spends its money. That fuels the economy, and the rich get richer, and the poor get richer, and the middle class gets richer. Nixon and Reagan and most of the politicians over the last 44 years, their goal has been to upend that system and send us the other direction. So in 1973, the top 1% made 8% of the wealth generated that year. Today, the top 1% makes more than 40% of the wealth generated. In other words, this idea of the American dream is gone. There's no middle class. The middle class has been eviscerated. Gen Z knows they will never own a house. They don't even buy cars. They don't even get their driver's license because they know they're not going to get there. Why? It's 2025. We're supposed to have flying cars. Like, how did we get here? One bad decision after the other. Between 1948.
Okay, and that's just the audio clip. I'll probably either put the video in the clip or I'll link to that clip in the description. But like I said, millennials, Gen Z, they won't be able to retire.